Hello and welcome to the Wire Talks. I'm Sidharth Bhatia. Till a few weeks before the elections, the Liberal Party in Canada was faring poorly in opinion polls. Then came Donald Trump with his threats to take over his northern neighbor, and the party changed its leader meanwhile from the deeply unpopular Justin Trudeau to the central banker Mark Carney, and the Liberals won an unexpected victory. The Canadian election was big news in India, mainly because of the complete breakdown of relations between the Modi government and the Justin Trudeau government over the latter's allegations that the Indian government was involved in the assassination of a Canadian citizen. The issue still hangs over the two, but there is hope that under Carney, relations will improve. Trade has been increasing, so that's one issue to hold on to and develop. But will Carney be able to address India's other concern, what it sees as the undue influence of Khalistani supporters in Canada? To address these and other problems and other issues, shall I say again, we have today Daniel Lak, a veteran Canadian journalist who also knows South Asia well and India. Lak, who worked for Al Jazeera as their US correspondent for 9 years till he retired in 2021, was earlier posted as the BBC correspondent in South Asia, first in Pakistan, then India, and finally in Kathmandu. He's also the author of two books, India Express, The Future of a New Superpower, and Mantras of Change, Reports from India in a Time of Flux. Daniel Lak, welcome to the Wire Talks.
Thank you very much, Sidharth. Thank you.
The victory of the Liberal Party, which was doing poorly under Justin Trudeau, as I said, was a surprise, given that it was way behind in the opinion polls. Is it solely because of the Trump threats to take over Canada?
Pretty much, as you said, it was 25 points behind in the opinion polls. The Liberals, who had a minority government, were on track to probably be relegated to third-party status, with just a few dozen members of Parliament, down from about 140. So Trump came to power. He started talking about the 51st state. He slapped tariffs on everything that Canada exports to the US, some tariffs in excess of 100%, it has to be said. The country panicked and it looked towards its political leaders. And on the right, there was a surging Conservative Party led by a young career politician who were rightly, before Trump, going on about affordability, going on about people's concerns about crime, solid domestic issues, parochial, but solid. They hit home. And then along comes Trump, and you face, well, we could be losing our country. We could become the 51st state. There could be a military takeover. The Liberals, meanwhile, had got rid of, as you said, the very unpopular Justin Trudeau. His 10 years in power were checkered, to say the least, and replaced him with a man who seemed like a very calm technocrat, a man who'd been at the helm of the Bank of Canada, our central bank, during the 2008-2009 global meltdown, and again had gone on to the UK to lead the Bank of England through Brexit, and was seen to have done a pretty good job during both of those. He'd also worked for Goldman Sachs and for big asset management companies around the world. So a safe pair of hands, but much more than that. He immediately seemed to bond with the electorate. His polling numbers went from 25 points behind to at one point up to 8 to 9 points up. And the final election result that he got, well, the Conservatives did very well, but not well enough. He has a very, very strong minority in Parliament, and the country is looking to him to steer the ship through troubled waters, at least for the next year or so.
Yeah. Actually, that segues very well to my next question. The Liberals remain the Liberals. I mean, the party has not changed. The leader has changed, and much of the party, more or less, is the same. If it was not effective under one leader, can they change under another? I mean, can the party start performing? Can Mark Carney deliver on the economy and other problems that concern the Canadians, which the Conservatives were bringing up?
That's the big question in front of everybody. I think a lot of people held their noses when they voted for Mark Carney and the Liberals because they knew it was the same old party. We didn't have a wholesale change in their slate of candidates. A lot of MPs are back in Parliament, and those that are new and got selected to run and did win in the election, well, they're party activists. They come from the ranks. Look, we share with India the Westminster system, the party system, and parties are very, very powerful, influential in our political system. From the outside comes this technocrat with no real background in party politics. Well, of course, that's seen as a plus by the electorate. But the other thing we share is that in our party system, the prime minister is what? First among equals. The prime minister is the person who sits at the head of the largest caucus in parliament. And yes, they influence the public in other ways, using the media, using the people who work in their offices. But at the same time, they have to rely on the political party, on the caucus of members of parliament in Lok Sabha in India, in our House of Commons here. They are the people who have to go out there and get public support for sometimes controversial and sometimes unpopular policies. Carney has no history of running this, and the same people are running it that ran it under Justin Trudeau. So we are watching to see what happens. But again, that Trump issue, this is unprecedented. No one in Canada and probably around the world has ever had to experience something like this, to have a leader in Washington, D.C., your best friend, your largest trading partner by far, talk about annexing you. This is something that Mark Carney is probably going to be given a lot of scope on. And I think even the Liberal Party will probably let him get away with a lot more than it might have let a traditional politician get away with, at least in the short and medium term. But let's see, unprecedented is the key word here. You'll hear me saying it a lot.
Yes. And in fact, just as a sidebar, Trump had an effect as far as Australia. We won't go into Australian elections, but you know what I mean.
Absolutely. No, that's so true. Around the world, it's resonating. It really is.
And if there were elections tomorrow in China, you know what the Trump effect would possibly do there, because they are facing the biggest tariff bomb, as it were, on their goods, 145%. I mean, that's quite a lot. But coming back to Canada, the first thing that Mark Carney has done, the Prime Minister has done, is to go and meet Trump, stare at the beast, as it were. And the press conference came off, I think, on the whole, quite okay from what I could see here. I don't know how the Canadian press has seen it. They said their piece. Mr. Carney, I think, said clearly Canada is not up for being annexed. And Trump said never say never. So therefore, the Trump effect is possibly going to continue. But there is scope for better economic ties, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, before the tariffs were announced, and he is tariffing our most important products. He's tariffing aluminum and steel. He's tariffing automobiles. He's suspended tariffs on the largest thing that we trade, and that's petroleum products. But this is really affecting all of Canada's economy. So without Mark Carney making it a priority to get down there and to talk to the president, at least start a relationship and keep that relationship positive. Don't have a disastrous outing like poor Volodymyr Zelensky did when he met Trump and J.D. Vance in the Oval Office a couple of months ago. And it didn't go like that. So, the bar was fairly low. They just had to basically seem to like each other or seem to not dislike each other, more to the point, let's put it that way. And that's exactly what happened. The media this morning here is digging deep into what they can get out of it, briefings from officials, and also the body language and what was actually said. And the conclusion is what you might expect. Okay, the tone is good. The tone is positive, not negative. Where's the substance? Where is what we really want to hear, that there's going to be a relief from these tariffs, from these trade measures? Well, that's obviously going to be left to the officials who have a lot of negotiating to do in the future. Canada and the United States have had relatively free trade. In other words, they send goods and services across the border without tariffs, without sort of charges imposed. Now, they've had that since the 1980s. This is what's under threat. The Canadian economy has more than doubled in size since then, largely due to trade with the US. So this is not something that Mark Carney can afford to ignore. It's the number one item on a very crowded plate of issues he's got to deal with.
Yeah. Now, coming to why we are also doing this podcast is that the Canadian election, which normally has no resonance in this part of the world, beyond a certain, casual interest, was of great interest this time in India, as you can well imagine. Under Trudeau, the relationship had deteriorated to a very large extent. Uh, I'd just like you to kind of go over that small period, which really saw, you know, nastiness almost, with both sides hitting at each other. And Mr. Trudeau was coming out with a new charge almost every day. The Indian government was shocked and surprised and irritated, and things went really down south. And the worst point being when the ambassador, the high commissioner himself, was charged with managing a hit job. So, can we go over that period for a time being?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was a low point, and what has been a, shall we say, up and down relationship over the years. Canada and India, both former British colonies, both Commonwealth countries, both parliamentary democracies. Well, the two sides over the years have spoken a good game about common values and worked together on issues involving security and international standards, multilateralism, all of that. But the nitty gritty of the relationship has never been particularly sweet for a long period of time. And the main issue is, of course, India's charge that Canada's been for far too long too soft on Khalistani supporting groups, Sikh community groups here in Canada. You know, I have to touch just a little bit on the history of Sikh immigration here. The Sikhs are, by some counts, up to 2% of the Canadian entire population. It's half of the population of Indian origin in Canada. It's the largest population of Sikh people outside of India. This is a very large community, far and away our largest, shall we say, non-white community in this country. It's quite remarkable when you think about it. And Sikhs have been coming here since the 1800s. Sikhs came over as part of the British colonial military presence back in the late 1800s. Sikhs emigrated here since the early 20th century and really started to come 60s, 70s, and of course in the aftermath of Operation Blue Star and unrest in the Punjab in India in the 1980s and up to the 1990s. And then lately, a lot of immigration, of course, has been driven by economic reasons. People coming over because they see an economic opportunity. You know, if you drive through Ludhiana in Indian Punjab, you see Canadian flags flying over car dealerships and businesses. The links at that level are quite remarkable. The Sikhs have settled around Toronto and they've settled around Vancouver. And they've really got themselves into politics through Gurdwara organization. They've organized vote banks for all of the major parties. They're very active in the party system. And it's quite a remarkable example of how to use the democracy we have for the advantage of your group, your community. I admire it. I think it's marvelous. And some within that community may have the notion of supporting separatism, a separate country called Khalistan in Indian Punjab, something that died out in India decades ago that has just not been on the table with Sikh politics in India. But it's not something that has permeated to the diaspora. We just had Khalsa Day, I believe, last weekend, and
Yes.
I was coming back from a film, blissfully unaware that it was Khalsa Day. Now that I'm more or less retired vis-a-vis journalism in South Asia, and my streetcar, my tram, was stopped for 40 minutes by a demonstration of, I would have thought, 20, 30,000 people with Khalsa flags. This was the demonstration heavily reported in India, where one of the speakers said, we have to get rid of people of Indian origin who aren't Sikh. Words to that effect. I don't really want to give them too much oxygen. But on the other hand, I didn't see it in our own media. So in many ways, the rest of Canada is not as aware of these issues as is all of India. That's probably why it comes as a shock to every new generation of politicians. Now, I mentioned Sikhs getting involved in politics. Justin Trudeau's first election in 2015, he had 15 people from the Sikh community in his parliamentary caucus. That's far more than the governing party in India had. And also he had 5 people of Sikh community in his cabinet. I was an Al Jazeera correspondent then, covering the US, as you said, and also Canada. I got a call from a person who was a friend of mine at the Indian consulate here in Toronto. She took me out for lunch, which was always nice, and showed me a dossier on 3 of those 5 members in Trudeau's cabinet, drawn up, I would say, by intelligence people in the Indian government, connecting each one of them to Khalistani statements and participation. Nothing I could see that indicated violence or encouragement of violence, but it was a fascinating insight. I put it to my editors and they said, well, it's not a story in and of itself, but keep it there for analysis and context. I think that's the issue. For India, the Khalistani thing is central, absolutely central. And why not? They're talking about breaking up a country. But over here, I hate to say it, but outside of the Sikh and South Asian community, despite the history of this movement in Canada and of the community, despite the history, it barely registers. And I've always found that shocking. I always have.
Yeah, I'll just come to that in a minute, because I've had a conversation in the past with somebody, and I'll bring that into this. But do you think Justin Trudeau was motivated to bring these issues up simply because he was influenced by his cabinet members or his caucus members or the community at large, or the Khalistanis influencers at large? Do you think that was it? Or, I mean, was it pure a political play that he was beholden to them? Or was it that he was genuinely concerned about what was happening, especially the accusations of killing of Nijjar?
Yes, let's talk about that, because we can talk about how the Canadians were doing this for political reasons, and perhaps in normal times I might have said that can explain it. But in this case, I think Trudeau was handed a lot of this information by the United States, by the Biden administration's intelligence operatives, who themselves had entrapped someone who was trying to hire a hitman to kill a Sikh activist in New York. And as part of that same plot, we are told here that Hardeep Singh Nijjar out in British Columbia, he was on the same hit list. This information did not come from Canadian intelligence agents and law enforcement in the first instance anyway, digging deep and seeing what was going on. A lot of this came from the US, from the FBI and the Drug Enforcement Administration. So that is why I would say there is more to what Justin Trudeau was accusing the Indian government of than just a political play. There is something there. My journalistic antenna have told me that there's something there. I've made a few calls. I'm not saying what they said explicitly is true. That's probably never going to be something we can say with surety. There's a lot of, country to country intelligence sharing, national security issues. But the Americans are pretty convinced. And I think the Indian reaction to America to immediately say, oh, yeah, we'll look into it. This won't be allowed. This can't stand. Whereas to dismiss what Canada said as a political ploy reflects more the fact that India takes America very seriously and Canada not that seriously at all.
Could it be also, I'm playing devil's advocate here,
Go for it.
and I'm just raising another way of looking at it. Could it be because the manner in which Justin Trudeau was going about it, that he was not doing it behind the scenes quietly, because every other day there was somebody or the other speaking either to the press or he himself was making a statement. So the whole thing came as a kind of virtually one accusation after the other. Could it be because of the tone of the whole thing that the Indians were getting irritated with Canada?
It could be. And I'm not here to defend Justin Trudeau or his government in any way, but I do think they did try a quieter approach at first, or at least that's what they say. And all I can do is tell you what they say. I have no insight into what they did. But they say they, on the sidelines of international meetings, and they had sent officials to speak quietly in Delhi, intelligence officials accompanied by foreign ministry officials, diplomatic channels, national security channels. They had laid it out, but it wasn't having any effect. Look, I see what India feels about the strength of this movement, and this guy Nijjar and the man who was targeted in New York, they were organizing an international referendum on Khalistan, where the Sikh diaspora in many countries would be asked what it thought, and the vote would be publicized. And, to me, this just sounded like a fairly hollow in-community activity that would appeal to the converted and not really has absolutely no standing, but not really have much news value either, because it's more dog bites man. You and I know what that means, rather than man bites dog, if the diaspora votes for a certain thing that's only a diaspora issue. But India took it very seriously. Indian diplomats were always complaining to the press here. When Sanjay Kumar Verma arrived in this country as High Commissioner, I knew him quite well in Delhi when he was at External Publicity. A nice guy and an interesting and smart fellow. We used to talk a lot. He was also in Kathmandu when I was there. He said that was his number one task, was to get Canadians acquainted with the dangers in the political system's support. And it's not just Trudeau. Other parties have also played footsie with Khalistani movement. In the 90s, it was the LTTE, the Tamil Tigers, who had a lot of vote bank politics in parts of the Toronto area. The Liberal Party then had to be embarrassed into not attending fundraisers where the LTTE was being mentioned and money raised for them. So, this is Canada's diaspora politics. This is a country that immigration is central to the economy, to the demographics, and to the political system. So I think what Trudeau and the others were doing was responding to India's very real concerns by saying, look, we can do something about this, but you can't be getting yourselves involved in our politics. We've also had a scandal here over the Chinese, foreign interference in elections. The Chinese using the diaspora community and raising money and getting Chinese international students to vote in political party elections, for which you actually don't need to be a citizen. Seems rather silly, but that's the rules here. You can just show up at a meeting and vote for a party leader or a candidate. India was also implicated in that. Indian diplomats and Indian people working on behalf of the government of India were showing up at political meetings and trying to influence people to vote, against Khalistani people. That's a fairly, I can see that being a, fair dues. It's allowed in the law of the land, but it is foreign interference in a local election. And rightfully, people say, well, all countries interfere in elections in other countries where the outcome may concern them. It's just a thing. The United States does it all around the world. And look, Russia did it back to them in 2016. It's life, it's politics. But right now, we're talking about people being hired to kill people, to murder people. And the Canadian authorities, they think, have enough information to prosecute the 4 people that they've arrested and charged with this, members of the Bishnoi gang from the Punjab in India. They think they've got enough information there to prosecute them. They will not get them to say on the stand that it was India or India had anything to do with it, in part because they have an eye on relations between the two countries. And what they wanted was some acknowledgement from the Indian authorities that this is not going to happen ever again. So let's see how this all plays out, the trial and otherwise.
But at what I was saying, I'm holding this point because that's an extremely important point. But what I was saying was that I had an interview with Mr. Ujjal Dosanjh, former premier of BC, British Columbia, I think. He was the former premier.
Yeah.
And he himself is a Sikh, has suffered at the hands of Khalistani activists, was beaten up. And he told me that I feel that the Indian government takes something seriously, which the diaspora has long forgotten, except for a few nut jobs. That those were more or less what he had said. Now, I read what you're saying, that you can see the Indian government getting angry about this because it wants to keep an eye on these malcontents all over the world, and because they may. You never know. We've had a bad experience with Khalistani.
We have.
We never know. It's best to keep an eye on them, and we expect the local authorities to help us on this. Canada kept on saying these are our, freedom of speech, etc. And somehow the two sides were just simply not gelling. But would you say that, of course, you can't speak on behalf of the rest of the diaspora, and diaspora politics, as you said, keeps playing out in different forms, the Sri Lankans, for example. But do you think that it is really I think you did say that, but it is really something that concerns or excites a very small number of people. The rest simply want to get on with making a life for themselves in Canada.
As much as we can speak, as you say, for a big group of people, for nearly, for nearly 800,000 people. That's how many people there are Sikhs in Canada, and most of them are first generation. There's been a huge wave of immigration in this latest generation. I would say no. They are here to make a life for themselves, to put their kids through university, and to start businesses. I'm not trying to be light here, but if you look at the transportation industry in Canada, it is now dominated by Sikh companies, truck driving and warehousing. And so there are so many successful people in this community. And you're not going to tell me that those people are going to spend all their time worrying about generations old issues in India that don't resonate there anymore. But, the vote is organized through Gurdwara committees. Gurdwara politics, as indeed any religious politics in other religions as well, can put the extremes forward and make them the loudest and the ones that have the most impact, even if the numbers aren't there. And I think that's probably the case here. I think that the Gurdwaras, where the Khalistani issue is to the fore, are the ones that probably are most interested in influencing the political process, the selection of candidates in various ridings across the country. And what do political parties do, especially if they're relatively ignorant of the impact of these issues on the wider picture of Canadian interests abroad and at home? Well, they respond to the loudest voices, the ones who can bring out the most votes, the ones who can get candidates elected at meetings that they want. So in the suburbs of Toronto, there are at least 6 to 8 ridings, constituencies, all of them vote rich, by the way, all of them with really large populations of voters, where every single party puts forward a Sikh candidate. That's the sort of influence the community has in the political system around Toronto. And if there are issues within that community that are heartfelt and extreme, those are going to be the loudest voices. And where do you use your voice? You use it in politics. The parties respond to that. Inadequately and wrongly, you could argue, yes, I think you could, but that's what they do. And that hasn't changed yet. It goes back to my original point about a surprising ignorance of the impact of allowing extreme voices to influence you on the wider interests of this country at home and abroad.
Yes, as you know, I've spent some time there, and even I've seen that even in Britain, it's the loudest voices, the most extreme voices,
Yeah.
who, by the way, have the time, the inclination, and the interest to push their agenda that get heard the most. So, in a multicultural society, for whatever it's worth, let's listen to these people because they represent the rest, and the quiet minority, which is busy with other things, gets quietened down. One of the reasons why the Canadian elections results caused a lot of interest was the defeat of Jagmeet Singh,
Yes.
of the NDP. For some, there has been an impression here that Jagmeet Singh himself is a big Khalistani supporter because he's a Sikh and he has Sikh support. Now, he well maybe, I don't know, I haven't come across a single statement by him using that word or saying, yes, he has spoken about self-determination. But if my reading of Canadian politics is very, 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 very limited reading of Canadian politics, is that he lost because the NDP, which is a socialist, really left-oriented party, had simply failed to perform over the last few years under his leadership. In fact, just at a time when the left as an idea should have been emerging against what's going on in the world and in Canada, he simply failed. Give me your analysis so that people here can understand perhaps Jagmeet Singh's failure.
Sure. Well, Jagmeet.
I might just add.
Go ahead.
I don't have to really belabor this point, but Jagmeet Singh is not allowed to come to India.
No, he's not. And he actually made a lot of that in rallies when he was speaking to the community. I'm not so sure it impressed non-Khalistani supporting people in the South Asian community here, many of whom vote for the NDP. As you say, the socialists. I think he lost for domestic political reasons, and I think he was a domestic player. I don't think the Khalistan issue motivated him, that he got up and said every day he was going to advance the cause through the Canadian political system. But he came from that background. And there was an early incident when he first became leader of the party. Everybody in Canada was celebrating someone who's not from the traditional European white background becoming a party leader. It felt good, you know. It felt good to think, okay, multiculturalism has finally come to our politics. Everyone was pleased about it. But we had a very good journalist here who covered the Air India 182 from the original tragedy, the original explosion, the original terrorist attack, through the various trials and inquiries and failures by Canadian law enforcement to bring anyone other than one person to justice. He attended a Jagmeet Singh rally, this Canadian journalist, Terry Malevsky, and he saw the posters of two of the accused, the two who'd been acquitted, Hardeep Singh Bagri and the other one, Malik. They were being waved around by the crowd at a Jagmeet Singh rally. So he did a gotcha question to Jagmeet Singh in an interview with him on the Canadian broadcast on CBC. And Jagmeet Singh was stymied, had nothing to say, and said he would look into it. He came out of that interview to be almost canceled for racism, for taking this man down and to me, it was the most misguided attack on a great journalist I've seen in quite some time. And he was absolutely right. Jagmeet then banned those pictures and banned talk of Khalistan from anybody involved in the party. So I think he may have come from that background. He may have had secret. I don't know. I don't know. I think he only wanted to push his agenda for, you know, better health care and more economic justice and workers' rights through the Canadian political system. And I think he lost because of the moment. People didn't want to take a chance on a third party. NDP voters switched to the two main parties. Yes, some of them went right. A lot of the vote went to the Conservative Party that used to back the NDP. The unionized vote apparently went to that. So I think Jagmeet was just not the man of the moment. I think his party lost almost all of its seats. They went from the mid-20s down to 9, including his own. His own background, I think, didn't really enter into it. He did use the Sikh Gurdwara system to get himself put forward as a candidate and to hire people to come and not hire, excuse me, I didn't mean that, but to motivate people to come and vote for him in leadership elections. But, you know, he'll go down in history as first of all, you know, setting a racial milestone, if you like, and also forcing the Trudeau government to bring in, you know, pharmaceutical insurance and dental insurance and lots of other good socialist things that they had to do to get NDP votes to survive their last parliament. So that's what Jagmeet Singh's legacy is here. Probably a good thing that they don't dwell on his background with the Khalistani movement, but I think that probably his departure from parliament is going to be seen as something that maybe gets our political parties more aware that that's something that isn't necessarily going to get you anywhere in the long term in this country.
Now, the issue as far as India and Trudeau government were concerned still hangs in the air. You did mention that there could be a trial of the Bishnoi gang members, and Mark Carney has taken over. How do you think it will move forward? How will the new Canadian Prime Minister, who's got to reset relations with India, he's so far, I think, made one or two statements
Yes.
which were pre-election statements, which were positive. But how do you think he will address this issue when it comes down to it? He still has to, it will remain a kind of elephant in the room. He'll have to address it. How do you think he'll do it?
Well, you know, he is a technocrat without a political background. We've talked about that. So, you know, his wish list is going to be technocratic in nature. Can you carry these things out through a political system like ours? Obviously, logically, Canada needs excellent relations with India. Our trade with India, it's not immense, but it's important to certain sectors of our economy and to a lesser extent, certain sectors of India's economy. We used to be the largest supplier of lentils to India. Uh, and 10 years ago, the government started imposing tariffs on lentils they were for domestic political reasons, and that diminished our share of the market. But they were then upped during the discussions and to and fro over the Khalistani movement, over the accusations of murdering Sikh activists in Canada. They were then upped, and our lentil farmers now find themselves having to search for markets elsewhere. So that's a big, we were a huge provider of lentils to India. That was worth billions of dollars. We trade a lot of chemicals with India. We trade a lot of newsprint. You know, India, with its healthy newspaper market, a lot of those newspapers are printed on Canadian newsprint. So, you know, we need India. We really do. So I think Carney will look at the numbers and say, this has to be done. We had free trade talks underway. We were due to announce a sort of protocol to say Canada-India free trade is on its way, and here are the protocols we're working on. That was cancelled after Trudeau stood up in Parliament and accused the Modi government of being behind Nijjar's killing. That was cancelled, put on hold, whatever. But even at that time, Sanjay Kumar Verma had said, the High Commissioner who was eventually went home, was expelled, depending on whose version you use, he had said only a couple of months and we'll have a free trade agreement. He was bullish on free trade. I think Carney has an oven-ready agreement that he can pull out and put on the table with India and say, let's put that stuff over there in a compartment. That's what he wants to do. How much is he going to need with his minority government? Some votes in some of the suburban regions around Montreal. Sorry, I'm around Toronto and Vancouver, not Montreal. And that's where the Khalistani issue might have some resonance with some aspects of the community there. I honestly don't think he's going to want to pander to that, to cater to that. I think he's really going to want to have positive outcomes on the trade file. We need more trading partners in Canada. We need to up our relations with existing partners. He even wants to get our trade relations with China back on track. They've also been frosty and costly in recent years. China has imposed tariffs on our agricultural goods. So Carney's going to try the technocrat route. He's going to try the logical route. He's going to try the obvious route. But will that get through a parliament on a knife edge? Stay tuned. I'm certainly not going to try and predict it.
So that means you are saying that anybody really, in this case, if I may hazard a guess, even a small riding, a small constituency vote in outside Toronto, community vote, anybody could trip up.
Yeah, I don't think they go to Parliament. The whips, you know, we also have a whip system like you do, so they know their votes in advance. The bill might not even make it to Parliament if they think 3 or 4 small ridings aren't going to vote for it. So there'll be horse trading in the background, that sort of thing. There'll be softening of measures. And then down that road is when you start to slip and those loud extremist voices get to claim victory that then affects the wider picture, the wider relations. I think India is well aware that this, in its heart of hearts, the governments of India that Canada has dealt with since the tragedy of Air India 182 have known that Canadian governments want this to go away. They don't want to deal with this. They don't want this impacting the very important trade, diplomatic, consular, and people-to-people relations. I mean, our Indian origin population is very important to India and to Canada, right? So this is a no-brainer. This should be a great relationship between two democracies, very much to Canada's advantage as a much smaller country, an economy that's soon going to be even smaller than India's as India's grows. But what do you do in a democratic political system? You try to manage the issues. So let's see if a technocratic approach can actually, especially with an all hands on deck with a Trump emergency approach, let's see if that can take some of these issues. When I say lesser, I'm not demeaning the issue in the eyes of those communities, but let's be honest, it's an issue that's important to a very small minority. Let's see if that doesn't take a back seat, that we can't actually get those more moderate voices out there to say, hey, put that on hold, put that away for a while. Let's deal with reality in front of us. I'm fairly confident Carney's going to try that approach. I don't think he has a notion of wanting to have bad relations with any country, especially not an important country like India that we've been, on paper friends with since India was independent in 47. I think Carney's going to emphasize that. And in doing so, if he pleases people out in the conservative voting parts of the country where they grow lentils and produce oil, and they get new customers and prosperity and better businesses, then I think Carney himself wins politically. Maybe that's more important than a few small ridings in suburban areas around Toronto and Vancouver. But that's me speaking, hopefully, as a Canadian as well as an analyst.
It has not gone, Daniel, it has not gone unnoticed in India again, where we look at these things with microscopic attention. That's 22 people of Punjabi origin have been elected, and 6 of them are Sikhs. So all those things are being micro studied, micro analyzed. But all in all, what you're saying is that enter a new prime minister, enter a new government. He happens to be a technocrat, very important. I I think he wouldn't have. I mean, I'm thinking aloud on what the Canadian government will wake up and see, among other things, Indo-British trade agreement after 3 years,
Yes.
which is critical. So if you're saying that they have a kind of trade agreement which was already being discussed, maybe those might be the positives that might emerge. So you are saying basically that here's a new government run by a technocrat who will kind of bring a technocratic mind to the entire thing to say, let's look at the bigger picture and let's reset the economic relation. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. The number one priority for Carney, we started here, is to deal with Trump. And one of the ways to deal with Trump is to improve Canada's trade, diplomatic, and other relations with a whole variety of other countries. We have free trade now with Korea, with Japan, with the European Union. We were even working on a free trade agreement with China, which is anathema to the human rights lobby in this country, to elements of the Chinese diaspora. But nonetheless, those objections were overcome for the longest time because of the importance of the trade relationship. I think you'll see that will override any concerns that some people may have about trade agreements and other good relations with India. That's going to be Carney's approach. That's going to be the approach of his team. We need lots of trading partners for our economy and future because we need to be less reliant on an unreliable United States of America. That's the underlying principle.
There are other issues also which concern India over and above these things. Students is one thing, immigration. I think you said that the Indian community is quite vast and Indian diaspora. But, there is an impression here that Canada has clamped on taking more people from India and giving visas for immigrants. So, do you think those things will also emerge as questions to be, as points to be discussed?
Oh, very much so. So what happened was in the aftermath of the pandemic in 2021-22, we had an incredible labor shortage in this country, mostly in low-end jobs or in seasonal jobs. And our immigration system prior to that, while taking 400,000 to 500,000 people per year, and most of them, or at least a plurality of them from India, the largest plurality from India, was based on economic points and educational points. So the people who were coming from India to Canada before that intake in 2021-22, they were people who were middle class in their own country. You had to have several $100,000 or more in assets that you could rely on while you got yourself set up in this country with no recourse to public funds and supports for your first year. So, those people who came over here, there was a long-term view. They were business people, professionals, they were investors. In 2021-22, we took at the request of our business community and of our conservative first ministers, premiers in our largest and most industrialized provinces, who were staring an economic disaster in the face, not enough labor, not enough people to work. They upped the intake of foreign students and made it easier for those foreign students to work, made it easier for them to both study and work. And as a result, huge numbers of people, hundreds of thousands, came from South Asia, from India, from the Punjab, as well as all over India, but also from other South Asian countries. And they weren't even really students. Like every single food delivery person here is from North India or from the Punjab. I mean, I speak to them sometimes in Hindi just to see if they are or not. These are terrible jobs. These are all-weather 24/7 jobs where you earn a couple of dollars an hour. So these are not the middle-class people flowing into the country. They can't afford to live here. So there has been a real problem with the immigration intake, a side effect, a sort of corollary to trying to fill needs in the labor pool. And it's a little more complex. And I understand that the Indian media paints it as an anti-India move or something to clamp down on that. But what they're saying here is we need to be more intelligent and get back to a points system where people come to this country and that actual students come in to study, which means they pay the excessive fees that foreign students pay in all Western countries. It's like, look at Australia, look at their intake of foreign students. Until Trump, look at the United States. The foreign student was king and queen because their fees kept universities going. Here's the problem. We still need that labor. We still need those people. So it's part of a societal issue here. We're not helping the most needy in our societies, whether they originate as, an intake of Indian students with visas or our own people born here who don't have particularly high incomes. This is another thing Carney has to do. He has to make housing affordable. He has to bring down food price inflation. This is something that affects every citizen. Right now, it's something that was being blamed on immigration, but in my view, wrongly. Immigration was not even a factor in our house price, home price inflation, and food price inflation. But it was a visible force in society with so many people showing up in a short period of time to work.
So we should be, how would you sum up the times to come between India and Canada?
If I were sitting in Ottawa and sitting on Mark Carney's advisory team, I would definitely urge that prime minister and the people around him, and here's hoping he gets people from outside the usual walks. There's some very good people now in Ottawa who have been advising prime ministers, people who know India very well, like John Manley and others like that. I think he's going to listen to those people to try and get those free trade talks back on track. As far as the accusations of the government's involvement or not in assassinations in Canada, well, that's happened. There is a criminal trial. We do not interfere in criminal trials here. He can say that. We're going to emphasize this and compartmentalize that. That's what I would say he should do. Get those trade talks back on track, work on other aspects of the relationship, have a good look at your caucus, manage it well on issues where you may have challenges around these issues. And I'm sure they know that this Khalistani issue is something that, well, it's not going to go away, can be put in a certain compartment and hopefully kept there. I'm sure there are person-to-person talks with at the diplomatic level as well, with whomever remains in our various diplomatic missions in these two countries. They need to get that representation level up again. Get the top people. Get people like Sanjay Kumar Verma. Whatever he's accused of doing, he was a senior diplomat and a very good one. Get people like that in our two embassies, our two high commissions. That's what I would advise Carney to do. But it's a very crowded agenda. And let's see which advisor gets the attention. I do think he's going to be making a lot of the decisions, even in our prime ministerial system. He's the reason they won, him and Trump, if you like. We voted for the technocrat. We voted for the safe pair of hands, for the business person, for the very wealthy business person, I must say. And we want to see some of that skill reflected in his approach to government. And that includes international relations with some of our most important partners in the world.
Yeah, well, that's Daniel, you've gone quite as a journalist should, given a lot of comprehensive context to the entire thing. In India, I haven't read much post the election. But there is a certain sense that, various countries that we are also trying to reset our relationship because the British Free Trade Agreement moved forward swiftly. I think you're fairly aware that things are, there are other issues that are emerging here, cross-border issues.
Yes.
We also have some tariff issues with the states. So I think keeping all that in mind, I would say that Canada is an easy country to reestablish relations with because there's already been, and these points will be addressed one by one. So I think personally, uh, if you were to ask me, I would say that we will see some positive progress on that front because it really made a lot of difference to people whose relatives were here, but their children were in Canada, for example, or somebody who wanted to study there. As it is, the United States has become so prohibitively expensive
Yes.
to study. And, Indian students now are looking at Canada, have been looking at Canada for the last 10 or 15 years seriously. So let's see how that turns out. So you provided a lot of context, and that helps because you have lived in these parts and you know how things are, how things are. You know the diplomatic scene also. So thank you very much for that, Daniel, um, for joining us for this edition of the Wire Talk.
You're most
So
welcome.
that's
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That was Daniel Lak, former BBC correspondent in South Asia and in India, and a veteran journalist from the BBC and Al Jazeera. And also, I may add, an author of 2 books on India. I don't know any book on India that can last more than 5 years or relevant
Very
in
true.
5 years, but I hope yours is. We'll be back again next week with another guest. Till then, from me, Sidharth Bhatia, and the rest of the Wire Talks team, goodbye.